let's see. We left off on page 409. We'll start off here on page 409. Talking about the boar's head. Hope nobody got bored. You get it? Boy, a lively crew tonight, I tell you. The boar's head. Now you can see as we're going through this how much all this is tied in with what the scriptures talk about following after the priest who eats the swine's flesh. Okay, it should make a little more sense to you as we read this. Let's see, this is on page 409. This is in Christmas customs and traditions. Okay, the boar's head. It says the boar's head ceremony takes place every year at Queen's College, Oxford, on the Saturday before Christmas. The ceremony commemorates a student of one of the colleges that has once escaped, and there is feedback on here or something. Is it going? That sounds better, I think. Yeah. Okay, a boar's head. Okay, the ceremony commences commemorates a student of one of the colleges who has escaped from a boar in a highly original manner. He was walking in the nearby forest of Shotover, studying his Aristotle, when suddenly from the undergrowth there rushed a wild boar of fearsome aspect. To avoid being gored to death by the boar's gnashing tusk, the student thrust his copy. We read that last week, didn't we? Tell you what, let's go down to the bottom of the page. The complete verses of this Christmas carol. Now, all this is tied into Christmas, okay? Because we're talking about this Christmas tradition, okay? And you see here it says the complete verses of this Christmas carol to the sun boar. Now, this ties in, okay, the sun god along with the boar, okay, which is, of course, the swine's flesh. Now, let's see. Let me find a picture here. Now, we talk a lot about the Catholic Church and stuff. I want you to show you this because I told you a lot about the sun, how they worship the sun. You see that sunburst? Okay, that's one of the altars in St. Peter's Basilica. And you can see here is the sun, which they put as a window. And you see the sun rays bursting out. Okay, now this is right. I'm not going to show it too big because the rest of it is just a bunch of perverted garbage. But here you have statues of some of the lords, the gods that have died beforehand. And this is one of the altars here, okay? And underneath here is, of course, a tomb down below there, okay? So this is what the Catholic Church is all wrapped up into, and this is what Christmas is about, is worship of the sun god, okay? And all this stuff stems back to ancient times, going way back to the Egyptians. So this Christmas carol of the sun boar, from Christmas and Christmas Lore by T.J. Scriptum, okay, Gale Research Company, Book Tower, Detroit, Michigan, 1971. It says, the boar's head and hand bare eye be decked with bays and rosemary, and I pray you, my masters, be merry. Okay, and he says, the boar's head, as I understand, is the chief service in this land, which thus be decked with a gay garland. Okay, well, today that would go right along, right, with the population the way it is today. Our steward has ordained this in honor of the King of Bliss, notice, who this day is to be served, okay? So you can see that that's no more than talking about the Lord of Misrule. Remember all of those things? And then it goes on, and it says, be glad, lords, both more or less, for this has ordained our steward to cheer you all this Christmas, the boar's head with mustard, okay? So you see here it talks about the lords and stuff, okay? And remember, they are in the England and so forth, they are still referred to as being lords. But they themselves don't even know that. When they go to the House of Lords and the House of Commons and all that stuff, they don't realize when they're called Lord. They don't even realize where all that even comes from, you know. Now on page 126 of the same book, it says, we must revert for a moment to the song of the boar's head already quoted. We have called it a carol, which it is in the strictest sense of the word. It is, moreover, the oldest printed carol in existence, having been printed by Wynkyn de Worde in 1521. Okay, so this is one of the oldest carols that they have printed. So it goes way back. And of course, this is something that you can see where they put their values in, referring to the fact that they would print something like this, and thought it was such a grave importance. Because remember, when you print it, now like today, you don't just type in the words in the computer and press a button and it prints it out. They had to typeset everything, and they had to load everything by hand, a complete page, everything that they did. So there was a lot of work in doing this, and then of course you had to ink and then press everything by hand. Various are the explanations that have been given of the prominence of the boar's head at the Christmas feast, all except those who are manifestly mere jokes or more or less of a religious character. Okay, so after reading these things, we can see here, again, in Compton's Pictures Encyclopedia, it says, the boar's head procession goes back to the days when the northern peoples believed that the spirit which made corn grow, that is the corn spirit, was embodied in the hog. So at Yule, they sacrificed and ate a boar to bring good crops. In Scandinavian countries, the boar is now represented by little cakes or loaves baked in the shape of a pig. How cute. I knew they made fishes, but I didn't know they still made little pig cakes. In medieval England, a boar's head was brought in with the ceremony at every Christmas banquet, and the custom still survives in Queen's College in Oxford. Now notice, this was the corn spirit, okay? They gave honor and glory to all the things in agriculture, to the gods, because remember, they thought that the gods were the ones that were responsible for giving them the crops and giving them all of these things. So again, if they did what the gods wanted them to do and they appeased the gods, then they thought, okay, this would assure them a great crop. Now it says the following definitions. Now remember, the corn spirit was embodied in the hog, okay? So the word embody and incarnate here from Webster's Deluxe Unabridged Dictionary says the word embody means to give bodily form, to incarnate, okay? And then incarnate means to provide with flesh or a body, to embody, to give actual form and to make it real. So the boar actually was the corn spirit. The boar provided the body for the corn spirit, and the boar provided the flesh of the corn spirit. Now, that should make you think about what Yeshua went through, okay? You remember he went to the possessed person and he cast the person out where? To the pigs, right? The herd of swine, and they went running down and so forth. So these things were alive. Now this was in the quote-unquote Holy Land, where they had a herd of swine that they were, taking care of, not just to eat up the garbage, but to actually sell and to eat and so forth. Okay, because this stuff was sent in. It was in the markets, the marketplaces, just as you find today. It was around there as well. Why? Because some rabbis said it's kosher pork. That's why. You ever see kosher pork? Huh? I've heard of it before. It's out there. Kosher pork. Yeah. Okay, so now think about, okay, this corn spirit had a body, okay, and the boar. Now, this word incarnate, as it means to give bodily form, this is the same thing that they have done with their God, Jesus, okay? Because remember, Jesus became flesh, okay? He was supposed to have been a spirit, the God, the Spirit, the Father, the Son, okay? And then he became flesh, and this is called the incarnation of Christ, okay? And this is one of the big teachings that's there in the Catholic Church that deals, that they believe and they teach to everybody. And this is something that, there's so many different things that's in the Catholic Church that people they go after, that they don't even realize what they're even, like the scripture says. They have no idea how blinded they are, you know. So they're God now. So because what you will do is you will find how all of these things are interrelated together and how they're all connected, and how all the different things about the gods, how they worship these things, and you can tie all of these things in together and see how deceived they were. And you can actually, when you read the scriptures, and you can see what Yeshua went through, okay? When you read these things, you can see what the opposition that he was met with, and the reason why. Because these things were in the minds of the people, okay? They were used to these things. And so even today, this is the reason why today, some people, you know, it's still embedded in their minds from genes of past. They don't understand, they don't know why, but they still associate and look upon religion as being just a farce, because they think, oh yes, here's this God man and all this kind of stuff. Well, they're teaching mythology is what they're believing in. They're not believing what the scripture says, but the scripture is the truth. But Satan has taken it to where and made a mockery out of all of these things and counterfeited all of these things with all the gods. You know, she worked with the gods and this mythology many, you know, longer, thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years, who knows how long, with the gods, long before man was ever put on this earth. So she worked, and as mankind grew on the earth, remember, you can be as gods. You can know righteousness and evil, right? She offered these things, and these things were taught to mankind. And this is how the God worship grew. And when a generation went on after another, they kept adding things to it with the understanding that they were inspired by these demons to worship. And these things began to grow and grow and grow to where by the time Yeshua came, you know, now way back in Genesis, you read in Genesis, I think it's Genesis 3:5, where the promise of the Messiah is, okay, then that Yeshua would have to be born, that Yahweh said mankind would have to have an intercessor. He would have to have that sacrifice, the coming of Yeshua. And so by the time Yeshua came on the scene and he dealt with the people, you know, this mythology and things, the worship of the gods was still in the minds of the people. And so when he did things, they compared this to what was written in their religious books, okay? Whereas instead of looking at the prophecies and seeing, because the prophecies were written long before mythology was ever written, okay? All of these things were inspiration from Yahweh, that is the truth. The rest of it is just a bunch of lies and garbage. But you can see this caused the opposition against the righteousness that the people wanted to go after, like the prophets. This is why they met the opposition, because of their writings and the belief and so forth and things that they taught. So this corn spirit here, this boar was there. So anyone who had to communicate, fellowship, or unite with, and be filled with a corn spirit all they had to do was simply eat the pork, okay, eat the boar. And today, people in this deceived world now continue to eat the swine in the form of ham, the Christmas hams and so forth. They don't have any idea why they serve ham, you know. Why do they serve a ham? Well, they don't have the whole, you know, if they had a big enough table, they could serve the whole hog, you know. But like Jimmy Dean does, right? The whole hog, you know, but they don't do that. They just take the ham, okay, in place of it. Just like they took just the head, the boar's head here that we see, in place of the entire pig, because the head symbolized the whole animal. You know, that's where the thought process and everything came from, the brain and so forth. Now, you see here that not only was this corn spirit resident in the swine, and the mince pies here, the title mince pies, but you see the custom of eating mince pies for good luck has its foundation in the same worship. And they eat this around Christmas times and New Year's and so forth. So this is from the Christmas in Ritual and Tradition and Christmas in Pagan. It says, cakes and pies partly or wholly of vegetable origin. Now this goes back to the vegetables for the fact that, you remember, it was the corn spirit and all the gods and the goddesses of the vegetation. Okay. They are, of course, as conspicuous as the English Christmas as animal food. The peculiar lookiness attached to some of them, as like when mince pies were eaten in different homes during the 12 days, they bring a happy month each, because there's 12 months, 12 days, So they're associated with, if you do this, then of course you'll have a great year, okay? They make one suspect some more serious original purpose, makes one suspect some more serious original purposes than mere gratification of the appetite. A sacrificial or sacramental origin is probable, at least in certain cases. A cake made of flour, for instance, may well have been regarded as embodying the spirit immanent in the corn. And remember, they made the little cakes in the shapes of the pigs and so forth, in the shape of the swine. And they ate these things. Well, what do you do when you go to the Catholic Church? You know, you still eat that little wafer, okay, which is a symbol of the sun. In fact, it's even stamped with the sun symbol on it, okay? And you partake of that, and you partake of that God as you take that God in you, and so therefore you take on the Spirit of God, okay? And you become as one with the God. Now, and that's the reason why, you know, the people had a problem and stuff, because, you know, when Yeshua said, "This is my body and this is my blood, partake of it," he wasn't saying, "Hey, you guys are going to be a cannibal. We're going to eat my flesh and my blood here," and start ripping off his arm and giving it to someone to chew on, you know. If he did that, he would have to come back every year, wouldn't he? Well, that's what you find in the myths, that the gods died and they came back every year again, right? Why? Because they had to do something over and over and over again, but Yeshua had to do things one time. And it brought perfection. It was perfect. It was a perfect sacrifice. He doesn't have to come back time after time after time after time. So when we take of the memorial, we think about that. And as he said, me and my Father will make our abode in you. Okay? And he said, "Eat of my flesh and drink of my blood," the symbols. Okay? The symbols. Now, because today what the Catholic Church does is they take that bread and they actually believe that that's turning into flesh. And they take the wine and they actually think that that is actual literal blood. So when the priest is up there before everybody, he is performing an act of cannibalism, eating and drinking flesh and blood before the congregation. And then you can see how that's a mockery to Yahweh, because remember what he said, "Do not drink when you come before me," all right? And so here's a priest that's supposed to be coming before his God at the altar, and he's drinking. So every abominable thing that they can possibly think of, that's what they do in the Catholic Church. So these mince pies, as we'll see, has a lot to do with these things. So the word mince pie here in Webster's, it says it's mince meat. It's a mixture of chopped apples, spices, suet, raisins, and now rarely meat, used as a pie filling. Mince meat was meat chopped up into very small pieces, okay? And to make mince meat of is an expression which means to chop into small pieces or to cut up into shreds. Now, we read a little bit about that last week. Now, calling to your attention here about this mince meat, okay, this is chopped up in very small pieces. Now, the gods and the mystery religions, remember with Nimrod, the whole Nimrod system started up, and that was the first organized system. You know, of course, there was sinners and people that you know, like Cain and so forth, that rebelled against Yahweh. But the Nimrod system, Cush was the first one to start up this Nimrod system to really push this rebellion against Yahweh, okay? And this is where the Babylonian system came from way back then. But now remember, well, we'll get into that a little bit later, where these things come from. But in the mystery religions here, beginning with the Nimrod system, okay, remember it talks about how the God was torn to pieces. And you read here in 2 Babylons, it says that, talking about, let's start from the top then. Then in regard to the death of Ninus, profane history speaks darkly and mysteriously. Although one account tells of his having met with a violent death, similar to that of Pentheus, Lycurgus, and Orpheus, who were said to have been torn in pieces, okay? The identity of Nimrod, however, and the Egyptian Osiris having been established, we have thereby light as to Nimrod's death. Well, the Nimrod system, actually it's Cush's death. But Osiris met with a violent death, and with the violent death of Osiris was the central theme of the whole idolatry of Egypt. So notice where it all comes from. It comes from Egypt. Osiris was
this Nimrod system, okay, or Cush, as we have seen, and that violent death which the Egyptians so pathetically deplored in their annual festivals was just the death of them. And the accounts in regard to the death of that God worship in the several mysteries of the different countries are all of the same effect. In other words, they're saying it doesn't matter where you go, whatever country, whatever culture you come from, the worship of these gods and goddesses, okay, it's all the same. Now in Bullfinch's mythology, you see here what we read before about the Van Hela, is the great hall of Odin, wherein he feasts with his chosen heroes. Now notice, his chosen heroes. You see how Satan, this stuff is thousands of years old, but you see how subtle Satan is. Why would it be talking about chosen heroes? You see how she mocks everything? How the two witnesses are Yahweh's chosen ones? So he feasts with his chosen heroes and all those who have fallen bravely in battle. For all those who die in a peaceful death are excluded. See? So Yaakov would be completely excluded, wouldn't he? The flesh of the boar, Skrimnir, is served up to them and is abundant for all. For although this boar is cooked early in the morning, he becomes whole again every night. Now, that is just, this idolatry of Egypt, or the son of Cush, began, and it shows how in the Egyptian empire all these things were served up way back then. Because remember, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, okay, not all of them came out of Egypt. Many of them stayed, and then some of them even ended up going back long after that. And Yahweh even said in his law, don't go back to Egypt, but they continued to do so. But you see here where he says that this pig became whole every night, okay? So this was like we'll just call it a mystery pig, okay? Because even though they ate of it, okay, it still replenished itself, okay? It had like this newness of life. So you can see what it put in the minds of the people, how the priest taught these things. Satan is just so subtle. Remember she told Eve, you won't die. Well, if you eat this pork, if you eat this pig, you won't die. In fact, it will give you newness of life, okay? And so this is why the people were so deceived, and the people ate these things. They didn't think anything about them. Why? Because they were following the priest who eats the swine's flesh. So he became whole every night. For drink the heroes were supplied abundantly with mead from the she-goat Hidrum. When the heroes were not feasting, they amused themselves with fighting. Fighting. Now that's the opposite of peace and unity, isn't it? And then you see where they amuse themselves. It's just fun and games. Okay, the same thing that you see today, in the video games, enough but violence. They go out and they fought among themselves, and they rode out. Every day they rode out into the quarter of the field, and they fight until they cut each other up in pieces. In pieces. So they made mincemeat of one another. Okay? And this was their pastime. But when mealtime comes, they recover from their wounds, and they return to the feast in Valhalla. Okay? So you can see they recover their wounds. This is another thing. This is the mockery of the resurrection. Okay? Because here they are, they're cut in pieces, but yet their bodies become whole once again. Every day they become whole once again. You remember what the scripture says? To become a new man. Okay? You become a new man in Yahweh. Okay? By following Yeshua and being united with Yeshua. Well, this is what Satan taught. That if you were united with your God, you could be renewed every day. Okay? And that's the subtleness that's in there. And that's why Christianity is, people are wrapped up into Christianity and they have no idea what they're into. They really think that they're actually worshiping the Creator. Some do. Some just do it just to fit into society. But some are serious-minded, thinking that they're really doing something. Well, the mince pieces, which were eaten for good luck, were eaten for exactly the same reason that the swine was eaten. Just as the corn spirit took bodily form in the hog, and then one ate the hog to be filled with the spirit of the God, the same minced meat of the God mixed with dried fruits, raisins, nuts, and which of course symbolize the abundance and fertility, were encased in dough made from the lard of the swine, the lard of the swine. And the flour, which is of course vegetation because it's a grain, would be eaten and be filled with the same spirit. So if they ate these cakes and they ate these things which symbolize their gods, then they took on the characteristics of their gods. Okay? Now this is why Yeshua's memorial is so important, because Yeshua said, you know, eat of this and drink of this and remember me. Okay? Let my work not die out and be nothing, but let it live within you so you can realize that this is what your life is all about. And this is the reason why I gave my life for you. Now, Wycliffe's Bible Encyclopedia here, it talks about raisins. It says, cakes of raisins were used in pagan festivals, and no doubt is offering to the fertility goddess, okay? Because the goddess, you know, the fertility goddess, offered, and remember when children were born, they were either dedicated to a male, or they were to God, or they were dedicated to the female goddess. And these things lived with them as they grew up and watched over them and so forth, the guardian spirits and stuff. This is where they get the guardian angels. This is where the Catholic Church gets the guardian angels from. And then you had the fertility goddess, which, of course, you had to worship if you wanted to be fertile and to bring forth a family and so forth. So these raisins represented these things and were tied in with this. Now, these cakes also were eaten, and just like Yeshua, remember, he is the bread of life, right? He is the bread of life. And in the heathen minds, you know, they said that Yeshua made himself into a god, right? He said, you make yourself into a god, because he spoke and said that my Father and I are one. You know, we work together. We are in unity. Just like they were doing with the worship of the gods by eating these abominable foods and eating these symbols of these cakes and so forth that they put in them. And notice, you know, and they made them sweet and stuff, and that's why that's one of the biggest things around the holidays is all the sweets, right, that's out there, that people just literally pig out, right? And that's exactly what they do. They pig out on all of this stuff, you know, and it's made with all the, you know, people don't care what they make this stuff with, so they can make it with the Lord and everything else, you know. But they eat all of this stuff. And every time that they eat these things, they don't realize, but they're actually eating sacrifices to the gods. And they don't even have any clue what they're doing. Now, from Christmas and Ritual and Tradition, that same book on page 288, we read about the union here of the animal and the vegetable realm here. And it says, the most remarkable of Christmas cakes or loaves of the Swedish or the Danish Yule boar, a loaf in the form of a pig, okay, a boar pig, which stands on the table throughout the festival season. So it's made and it's set on the table so everybody can look at it and always remember what they come into table for, okay? Is to keep that in their mind. So it stands on the table throughout the festival season. It's often made from the corn of the last sheaf of the harvest. And in it, Dr. Fraser finds a clear expression of the idea of the corn spirit as embodied in pig form. Okay? Now notice, it's made from the last sheaf of the harvest. Okay? Whereas Yahweh says that during the feast, we are to bring a sheaf of the first fruits, right? A sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. But here, they bring a sheaf of the last sheaf of the harvest, the last, whereas Yahweh says the first. So everything that Satan does, you can always see how she will do just the opposite of what Yahweh says to do. Now, often it's kept till sowing time in spring, when part of it is mixed with the seed corn and part of it is given to the plowmen. But that's real tasty. How old is this thing? Well, I don't know. It's from last year. We put it in the closet, and we just took it out today. But it sits on the table all year, all during the time and so forth. But then they give it to the plow horses and the plow oxen to eat. Okay, so not only is it all in the expectation of a good harvest. Now, not only is it only given to the person to eat, but also to the animals that he's going to use to go through these fields. Okay, and they had different rituals and stuff that they would do to the fields in order to bring forth a great crop, when they offer these things to their gods and their goddesses and stuff. Let's see, it says, so every kind of clean and unclean animal, and vegetable, fruit, herb, spice, wine, and dairy food, all of these things was presented to pagan man to his abominable gods. When these items of food were presented for this specific idolatrous purpose, these were the things sacrificed to idols. Those who ate them at these times, even though they may have been clean foods, according to Yahweh's law at any other time, the way that they were used made them unfit for any of Yahweh's people to eat. They were things sacrificed to idols, and those who ate were sacrificing things to idols. Okay? Now keep that in mind, because we're going to read and get on the page here. 1 Corinthians 10, and back off here a little bit. 1 Corinthians 10, 20, 22, and then 25 to 28. But he says, but I say to you, the things which the Gentiles sacrifice. Now that's what we're talking about, these sacrifices. They sacrifice to demons and not to Yahweh. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of Yahweh and the cup of demons. And you cannot partake of Yahweh's table and the table of demons. Do we provoke Yahweh to jealousy? Are we stronger than him? Can you just say, oh, it's no big deal, no big deal. Everything that is being sold in the market, do not eat, but ask questions on account of your conscience. Why? Because what they would do is sometimes when they have these sacrifices at the temples, they'd have so much meat left over to where it was too much for the priests to eat and too much for the people to eat and stuff. So they would take it when it's been dedicated to their gods and slaughtered and so forth and cooked, and they'd bring it to the marketplaces and they'd sell it there. So he says, everything sold in the marketplace, do not eat. Ask questions on account of your conscience. If any of those who are unbelievers invite you and you want to go anywhere, is bring anything presented to you, do not eat and ask questions for the sake of consciousness. He says, but I won't, if anyone says to you this was offered to gods, the Elohim, they had blasted him. Do not eat it, not only for the sake of anyone who for the person who informed you, but also for your own knowledge. For the simple fact that, you know it's been offered to the gods, so don't partake of it, because you're going to become a God worshiper yourself. Now, all of these things is what you partook of all the days of your life before you came to Yahweh's house. You continually ate things that were sacrificed to gods. And this is what we had in our bodies. This is what kept us alive all of this time. And that's why we can be thankful that Yahweh has brought us to the point to where we can cleanse and get all of that stuff out of our bodies and be dedicated to him, so that we can eat the clean foods that give glory and honor to him. Now the prophet Isaiah, he talked about these mystery religions as well. And this is what we had been talking about here, about the things sacrificed to idols. He in Isaiah 65, verses 3 to 5, the King James Version says, this is the people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face, that sacrifice in gardens and burn incense upon altars of brick. Of course, they don't provoke Yahweh to anger. You can't provoke Yahweh to anger. You can't make Yahweh mad. Okay? This is just another way in which they wrote these things to make Yahweh look like one of their gods. You got to remember now, okay? They took Yahweh's name out and they replaced it with Lord and God to make people think that Yahweh was just another God. Okay, he was just another God or another Lord. And that's why they put those words in there. But he's not. So he can't be provoked like the gods were. But notice what they do. The people sacrificed in gardens. Okay. Now this was gardens that they had and stuff. But now think about the garden of Yahweh. Okay. You know, these were the churches. These were the places of the assemblies of their meetings. That's what a church is. It's an assembly. It's a gathering together of people. Okay. It's not just a building. You know, that's the church building. The people made up the church. They made up the gathering and stuff, just like the house of Yahweh is the people of Yahweh. So they had their gardens. They sacrificed in gardens, and they burned incense upon altars of brick. And this is what you find today, because in the Catholic Church, that's what the altars are made of. The altars are made of, not the red brick that you see houses out of, but it's made of stone, okay? And it's polished and so forth. That, again, is against Yahweh's law. Because remember what Yahweh said, when you make an altar was supposed to be of unhewn stone. You're supposed to just take the stones the way that they are and pile them up and make an altar. You're not supposed to get up there and carve little carvings in them and polish the stones and make them look real pretty and stuff. That's not what the churches do. They make it look very beautiful and pleasing to the eye. Everything is pleasing to the eye. When you walk into the church, the windows and glasses are stained with beautiful colors. When the sun shines, it amazes people because it's just like, oh, wow, look how beautiful. You know, because of all the bright colors that's there and stuff. And then you look at the altar with all the gold. There's a lot of gold in the Catholic Church. You know, and everything is gold. Even the priest, the chalice that he uses to drink the blood out of, you know, it's polished gold and so forth. So everything is made to look beautiful. It's pleasing to the eye, just like Satan always used. So they burn incense upon altars of the bricks. And they do burn incense in the Catholic Church. And they have their little censers that they walk around with and shake it and burn this stuff. Which remain among the graves, and they lodge in the monuments, notice. They lodge in the monuments, which eat swine's flesh, and broth of abominable things is in their vessels. Which say, stand by thyself, and come not near me, for I am holier than thou. These are smoke in my nose, a fire that burns all the day. It's kind of like Yahweh is just symbolic of Yahweh thinking about, you know, they're going to be destroyed and they don't even realize it. But he could smell it because he knows prophecy. He knows what the future is. You know, he knows what their end's going to be if they continue to hang on to that. But notice, you know, the monuments and stuff. You know, the Catholic Church is one of the it's built upon, the big thing is St. Peter's Basilica, of course, which is a necropolis, okay, which is nothing more than just a city of the dead, what people have. And these things go back long ago. This is a little article here. So it's article. I got to zoom back in. But you can read that, I think, right? Okay, known Vatican, the Vatican Scavi, which is nothing more than the dead site that they're talking about. Okay, but it says, notice the Vatican necropolis, okay, which is the tomb of the dead of St. Peter's tomb. The area was when it was discovered, St. Peter's Basilica in 1940s, around the time of World War II, when the Vatican was commissioned excavations to be carried out there before Pope Pius IX was set to be buried in that space, long presumed to be the final resting place of St. Peter. It was presumed that there was nothing much down there, okay? But what they found was, let me get down to this verse here. What archaeologists found, however, was a burial ground, okay, dating all the way back to the 4th century. Now, the 4th century is what time? What time is that? The time of Christianity, right? In the 4th century. They found the temple of Emperor Constantine, who had ruled at that time, and a spot of ancient graffiti that translated as Peter is here. Okay? So, they also found a red marking there, and that was supposed to have been where this graffiti was. It says Peter is here. And so now they knew without doubt that Peter was buried there. So then they begin to build up, even more so the fact that, see, we told you that this was Peter's death place, And so the morbid thing is that this big altar that they have is built right on top of a tomb, just as it says. They make these altars of brick, and they lodge in the monuments. These monuments, they would spend the night there. These are called, necropolis is translated as city of the dead, okay? And these things still exist, by the way. Let's see if I don't know if I saved that article or not. They still exist, and people live in them. Oh, here it is. Okay. A necropolis is a large ancient cemetery with elaborate tomb monuments. Remember what it just said here about the prophets? Which remain among the graves and lodge in the monuments. Okay? Elaborate tomb monuments. The word is derived from the ancient Greek necropolis, literally meaning city of the dead. The term implies a separate burial site as distinct from a city as opposed to tombs within cities, which was common in various places and periods of history. Rome is famous for that. Okay? There's churches all over the place. There's places that are built over these tombs. Okay? And you got to remember what Yeshua talks about the whitewashing of the sepulchres and stuff to the people. They would, around Passover time, they would whitewash the tombs so that people would not step in them and go over them and so forth, so that they wouldn't become unclean and so forth. So, these things are still alive. Now, here's one, the city of the dead. Now remember, everything came from Egypt, right? The city of the dead of Cairo, this was in Cairo, Egypt, okay? This is an Islamic one called City of the Dead. And the people of Cairo, the Cairenes, and most Egyptians call it the cemetery. It's 4 miles long, north-south, dense grid of the tomb and mausoleum structures where some people live and work among the dead. Some reside here to be near their ancestors. Now remember, ancestral worship, okay? They worship their ancestors. And they keep their skulls and stuff inside, and they have altars and stuff that they build in honor to them, and they worship their dead ancestors. Some live here after being forced from central Cairo due to urban renewal development. That was at a later time and so forth. But you see how some people live there. But now that was in Egypt there, okay, in Cairo. Now it says Islamic, but of course the Romans did the same thing, and that's what Rome is based upon. The whole city of Rome is based upon that. You remember the catacombs, that they talk about the catacombs, and they try and say that, all the Christians were there, and the Christians died under Nero, and, they were buried under the catacombs and stuff, No, this was the dead. This was the cities of the dead, where they built these things upon. I mean, it's really morbid what they do when they decorate with bones and skulls and so forth. They have churches that way, churches where the whole wall is decorated with skulls and bones of people where they probably murdered in the Crusades and things. So it says here that they provoked Yahweh to anger, which of course they did not. Okay, you can't provoke Yahweh to anger. But he allowed these things to take place so that the people could go about doing these things. Now, the reason why, Revelations 12:9 says the whole world is deceived. The whole world has to be deceived, okay? Why does the whole world have to be deceived? To prove us. Yahweh's got to prove us. He's got to make sure that we won't join them, that we will hate sin and come completely out from among them. And so the whole world has to be deceived for that very reason, so that the house of Yahweh could be established and stand out as a light among the darkness that's here. Okay? So these rituals took place, and these people lived among the monuments, and they do now. They had, you can find pictures where children are playing all among the tombs and so forth, and people's houses are right there. They take old mausoleums that were destroyed and stuff, and clean them up and live in them and so forth. They live in the cemeteries, in other words, okay? And this is what the cities of the dead were. But Rome was very big on this as well. And this is why the Catholic Church, you know, it all stems back to this. When Isaiah talked about it, you see all the history that is there having to do with Rome. And they did all this as they followed the priests who ate the swine's flesh, having to do with this boar's head, okay, having to do with all of these myths, mythology about the gods that died and so forth, and about the heroes, and how mighty this pig was, that it could, you know, make itself whole once again. Okay, well, you can't. You can't make yourself whole except by being holy. And being holy is keeping Yahweh's laws. But they believe that by eating these unclean foods, this is what would bring you health. You know, and this is how Satan goes way back to the Garden of Yahweh, where Satan deceived Eve. And so they sacrifice in the gardens here. And we see here on page 414 about Adonis. Of course, Yahweh condemned all the sacrificing of the gardens. But the garden can take all forms, you know, even from a potted plant in a city park and so forth. And remember the obelisk that sits in Vatican, okay? That's only one place. There's also one sitting in New York City in the park right there, you know? And then there's one in London. Well, the major capitals of the world where the beast set her footprint at, that's where these things were laid out at. Adonis. Now it says here Adonis. It says originally a divine partner of the Oriental mother goddess. Okay? Again, now we're talking about the goddess, the mother goddess, who of course is Satan. And then Adonis. Now it always, these things, remember the Trinity and so forth also dealt with abominable things within family members and so forth. But Adonis here, which means Lord, embodies the yearly growth and death of vegetation. Like numerous other deities, Oriental, Egyptian, and Cretan. Cretan, everybody knows what Cretan is, right? You know what a Cretan is? The deformed idiot. It's a Christian, okay? That's where the word Christian comes from, Cretan, which means a deformed idiot. Now, his cult made its way to Greece about the 7th century BC, and is often heard of later. In Greek mythology, okay, he was a beautiful young son of Myra and Smyrna by her incest with her father. So you can see all of these things, how all these abominations that Yahweh says don't do because all the nations before you were doing, okay? Well, this is where you see all of these things in these stories, these stories in mythology. All of these myths encompasses all of this evil, okay? Aphrodite, the goddess of love, loved Adonis and mourned bitterly while he was killed by a boar when hunting. Zeus allowed him to spend part of the year with Aphrodite and part with Persephone in the underworld. Hence he dies and rises again annually. But you got to remember something, okay? These gods don't continue to live on, okay? Like this, you know, in their worship, they live and then they die. They live and they die. They live and they die, which shows that they have no power. Because if they had true power like Yahweh does, they would be remaining alive forever, like Yeshua, right? And so there's the differences that people just don't see when they look at these things. Now, in another version, Aphrodite entrusted him, while still a baby, to Persephone, the queen of the underworld, who was too struck by his beauty to give him up until Zeus, or someone acting on his behalf, arranged for Adonis to spend a third of the year with either goddess and the remaining third where he pleased. At his festivals, which were private affairs into Hellenistic times, which has to do with the Greeks, he was ceremonially mourned, and seeds were planted in shallow pots of well-watered earth to grow quickly and soon fade again. The famous gardens of Adonis, okay? So they made pots, and this is why you see a lot of the pottery and so forth. when you see the ancient writings and stuff, like especially like the Egyptians and stuff, you'll see a lot of plants there and stuff, okay? All having to do with the fact that these ancient gods were worshipped in that manner, okay? His worshippers were mostly women. And the closest Oriental parallel is the myth of Ishtar and her favorite Tammuz, with whom Adonis is sometimes equated, as in Yeshayahu 8:14. Now, by many other stories, more or less resemble the Greek myth, being the result of similar cults of the year gods. Of course, they worship the same gods and goddesses. They just changed the names, remember, in different localities wherever they were at. But when people traveled, they knew who they were worshiping. It was just under a different name. Adonis, the representation of the yearly growth and death of vegetation, was killed by the boar, which actually gave bodily form to the spirit of vegetation. Remember that boar took on, embodied, or the god was incarnated into this boar. Those who sacrificed in the gardens, as the prophet Isaiah said in verse 4, ate swine's flesh, an act which provokes Yahweh to anger continually. And it doesn't provoke him to anger continually, but this is always before him. Like when we just read where it says, they're like a smoke in my nose, a fire that burneth all the day long. In other words, it's a remembrance before him. He remembers these things, and he knows that one day all this is going to be wiped out. And he's looking forward to that day. He's looking forward to the time when the sons of Yahweh will be revealed. They remain among the graves. Now, they lodge in the monuments. Now, these worshipers, as it says here in Isaiah 65:4, the King James says they remain among the graves and they lodge in the monuments. The Anchor Bible here, in 2nd Isaiah, it says, it was a common practice to spend the night in a temple or shrine in the hope of receiving an oracle dream. Okay? In other words, they thought that if they lived there, and if they slept there among the dead, then all of these spirits that were walking around and that were alive in the cemetery, surely they would give them something in a dream, and they would have some type of understanding. Okay? Again, you can imagine when the prophet Daniel came before Nebuchadnezzar. Now, when he got his inspiration from Yahweh and he brought this forth, remember they called Yahweh a god. It says, mighty is the God that Daniel worships, And this is the kind of stuff that would have been in their minds, that they thought that Daniel received this information from his spirit, the spirit that he worships, the God that he worships. Because this is the kind of stuff that they were familiar with. This is the lifestyle that they were living. Now, the Holy Scriptures are filled with warnings against the worship of the dead. It tells you, do not worship the dead. Don't give honor and glory to the dead, because the dead know nothing. But yet, people will set up their altars, and again, you have Halloween, and then the day after that, everybody goes to the graves and they go to the cemeteries, and they clean up the graves, and they put the flowers on the graves, and they just sit there, and they just think, and they start talking to the grave, like as if the person can hear them. But, and they say, well, I know where he's at. He's in a better place. What better place? The dead know nothing, But to them, they carry on the conversation. It makes them feel good, when they do that, they say. Because they're worshiping their gods when they do these things. Dead worship now. It says historically ambivalent forms of interaction with and the commemoration of the dead found in most cultures and religions. Such interaction may be said to be positive when help is extended to the dead by providing an adequate tomb, effective rituals, foods, offerings, prayers, and observance of mourning periods. It's negative when the dead, like other spirits, ghosts, and demons with whom they often merge, are considered a threat to the living. In this case, rituals, prayers, offerings, and magical techniques were aimed at restraining the dead from acts of destruction and revenge. Often both attitudes coexist side by side. So you can see the confusion there. They don't know whether they're going to be protected. They don't know whether they're going to be cursed by these dead people. So the worship of the dead was prevalent in those primitive societies which engaged in sun worship. Okay, sun worship. Again, remember, the whole Catholic Church is based upon the worship of the dead and the sun god. Okay, even the host itself, the one that the priest has, which is a big one. Everybody else gets a little one, you know. But he's got the big one, and he's got to hold it up so everybody can see it, and he's got to crack it and so forth, and he's got to eat that piece of cardboard. Piece of cardboard tastes better than that thing does. I'm telling you, it sticks to the roof of your mouth. It's disgusting. It's just nothing but starch. It's horrible. But it's got the imprint on there, okay? And it's got the little sun deity on it and so forth. But they have what's called the monstrous, which is that gold. It's a stand, and it's got sunburst. It's always shiny, shiny, bright gold. So it's like this gold up here where it just glistens. And then right in the center is the place where they can put that host. And they will take that and they will put it on display. They will set it on the altar and they will leave it there on display for people to actually come and bow down to and kneel to and to pray to. Okay? Now that represents their god that they're eating. And that's the sun god. That's the Mithraism. That's the one that they're worshiping. That's the worship of the dead, because it's a dead god that they're worshiping. These dead rabbis, these dead lords, these dead popes and so forth that they bow down to. This is what it's all about. So, the worship of the dead was prevalent in those primitive societies which engaged in sun worship, since they believed that the sun carried the dead into the underworld. That's why it goes dark, you know. The sun goes to the underworld, and so you have nighttime. It comes out of the ground, and you have daylight. See, night and day, night and day, night and day. Makes sense, don't it? Well, to the pagan mind, it did, because these are the things that they perceive. Because remember, when we talk about the primitive times, okay, it's like the people of Yahweh had knowledge and understanding. The prophets knew these things. The prophets knew that the sun was where it was at. You know, the prophets knew that the earth was round. The prophets knew that there was a day and night line, because you know that when all these things are described in the scriptures, they're written in the scriptures. You know, they knew these things. They weren't ignorant of these things. However, those who did not read the scriptures, these were the primitive ones. These were the ones who didn't know. These were the ones who followed the priests who taught them. And of course, the priests looked like the mighty knowledgeable ones, and they kept the people ignorant. They dumbed them down so that they would never study the scriptures to look to see where these things came from. So whatever stories they told them, it made sense to them. I told you once before that I remember, being told, I went to Catholic school, and I remember being told, the nun told us a story about that somebody went to church to get the communion. He didn't believe. He was an atheist, right? So he went up there and he stuck out his tongue and he stuck the host on it, and he walked off and he spit it in the napkin and went home. Well, he went home, and as soon as he got home, he took a hammer and nail and he nailed it to the wall. And he didn't think anything of it. And later on, he came back and blood was dripping from the host. Now, that's what they tell the children, And this is to think like, oh, wow, okay. Well, I don't do that to the host. I thought, ugh, if it's bleeding, I don't want it in me, But that's the kind of stuff that they say that's so deceiving to the people, They tell them these lies to build these things up. Okay, so at sunset, they could restore them to the light at dawn. Its complexity seems to grow with both economical and social differentiation. So they base their economy upon these things, same as you see today in Revelation, right? The beast, who can make war with the beast? And the beast, has all the people will mourn when they see all of these things come down, this whole system of economics. In general, it's less discovered among gatherers and hunters. It becomes very complex among the sedentary cultures of planters, for whom the identity of the village, the fertility of the field, and the magical religious interpretation are and remember the magicians that were in Egypt, right, and so forth. They are in many aspects substantialized in the mystic of birth and death and the rituals that refer to them. Finally, it culminates in archaic high cultures with their emphasis on social status as expressed in the burial customs such as existed where? In ancient Egypt, China, America, all of these places. It says some of the ancient African kingdoms. Why? Because these people moved here and they brought these things with them here. Okay? In ancient Greece, food offerings were laid out at the crossroad every month for Hecate, the goddess of the underworld, and for the ghost of those who could not rest in their graves. In the Old Testament, traces remain of sacrifices offered to or for the dead, and of the practice of furnishing them with food, even though this was condemned by official of Yahweh's law, actually, in Deuteronomy 26:14. Okay? So, people, and they still do this today. They still worship the dead. They still, I always thought it was so funny. A person's dead, right? He's dead, he's at the funeral home, he's in a coffin. And you have a wake for him. A wake? The guy's dead. What do you mean awake? You're not going to resurrect the guy right now. But they, and at that time, over here, in this room over here is a dead body laying in there. The next room over here is where all your refreshments are, That's where all your coffee is, your cookies, your cakes, and all your different food and stuff that people make. They come and they bring in there, and they're eating this stuff while the dead person is over here in the other room that they're honoring, because this is funeral. And they come in here and they eat these things. And they have no idea what they're doing, but they're still doing the worship of the dead. They're still doing the same things that their ancestors did that Yahweh condemned them for. But that's the deception, and that's part of the shocking facts of devil worship.